turn to Romans chapter 1. Good evening and welcome to those of us by way of Facebook, and good evening and welcome to those here. And it's nice to see you all this morning. We'll be looking at Romans chapter 1 this evening, verse 18. And we started out last week, and we've been doing this series on response to social justice. We're into this area of sin. We talked about last week how this idea of original sin has this predisposes this idea that we are all one race and that we're all guilty of sin. And we started out last week with a quote, and we'll do this again tonight. Sin disposes people to see themselves and those like them as better than they are, and to see other people who are very different from them as the ones who are damaged. We said last week, damaged, quote unquote, means fallen short of God's standards for humanity, and God's standards reflect God's own attributes. Therefore, God's standards, i.e. God's image, becomes precisely what one has and others lack. God has made humanity in the divine image, but as biblical scholars explain, we inevitably end up, to varying degrees, making God in our image as well, be it consciously or subconsciously. Voltaire said it best when he said, if God has made us in his image, we have returned him the favor. And so we're there now in this idea of original sin, and we've used it in various ways. And it's embedded in the death of the human race. Adam's rejection of life and his rejection of God transmitted us down through the generations. Original sin entails the unity of race that all have a common origin. And thus, it would be one of those things that we look at when we deal with people on a basis such as what we're dealing with in our own country of the Black Lives Matter movement, the social justice issue. The original sin is we've all sinned. We're all guilty of sin. We're all guilty before a holy God. And so that gets us into our next section. I'm going to give you the term, but before I give you the term, I'm going to clarify or put a parentheses around it, because the term has a lot of bad connotations, so hear me out before you judge me, all right? Okay, because a lot of times people hear the term and then tune me off. So the term is total depravity, and I don't want you to think of it in other terms, but let's try to explain it. It's a corrupt condition of human nature. The solidarity of race, this idea that we are all sinners, we've all come from Adam, so we're all one race. This idea that that everything is about us is affected by sin. Right, so we can agree to that, can we? Everything about us is affected by sin. So our feelings, our emotions, our thought processes, our personalities, our actions, our thoughts, everything about us is affected by sin. Now, also, let's make a couple caveats. This doesn't mean that every person who's living is as bad as he or she could possibly be. Right? We know our own hearts. Hopefully we're honest enough with ourselves to make the claim that we are bad, but there are some things within our own hearts that could be even worse if we acted upon thoughts that we've had. I mean, I've had the thoughts, I'll be driving down the road and something comes to my mind and I say to I can't believe I had that thought. And I'm not the only one. I don't think I'm the only one. I think that we have all been there where we've just been doing something and just this random terrible thought has entered the picture.
Especially if somebody cuts you off.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to go there, Smitty. But yes, if somebody has cut us off, or if we're driving, or even sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and I can't believe I dreamed this dream. So we have terrible thoughts. But we're not as bad as we possibly could be, because if we acted out on some of those things, how much worse would humanity be? Nor does this mean that humanity has a conscience or lacks a conscience. This just means that there are things, every facet of our humanity has been touched by sin. That it has been destroyed. I would not say destroyed. Destroyed is such a strong word, but it has been touched by sin. It has infected our entire being. And we can go back to the sock illustration. If you remember the sock illustration from a few weeks ago, the hole in the sock is not that means there's nothing there. It's the absence of wool. It's the absence of cotton, right? So just because there's a hole in the sock doesn't mean that that's a nothing thing. It's just the absence of something. So when we say that we have sin in our life, or sin has touched every area of our being, it's not that there's a hole in our sin. It's that there's a hole in our holiness. That makes sense? Does that make sense? And we dealt with this with God and the fact that God doesn't allow evil. God allows evil in this world not because he's not a good God, but because we have chosen death over life. You've chosen sin instead of God. So it's the entire, as one author says, it's the entire absence of holiness, not the highest intensity of sin. I mean, you can look at several biblical examples for this. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 5. You're in Romans chapter 1. We'll get there momentarily. But I want to show you Genesis chapter 6, verse 5. We're right there before the flood. Right, this is the chapter. We have Adam and Eve, sin, chapter 3. We have Cain and Abel, chapter 4. We have all the begats, chapter 5, allowing us to see that the consequences of sin. And he died, and he died, and he died. Chapter 6, we get Noah there in verse 9. But what does God say about humanity in Genesis chapter 6? He says there in verse 5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. I mean, 6 chapters in Scripture, and God is telling us that human's heart is evil continually. Joe, can you turn the fans on these two, please? Romans chapter 1, verses 18. I had you turn away from there periodically. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. Paul writing about the universality of sin to the church at Rome. Help if I get there. Romans chapter 8, verses 18. We won't read it, but we'll read you can look all the way to chapter 3, verse 20 to get the understanding of what Paul is getting at as far as the universality of sin. Beginning of verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. For God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. And it goes on through chapter 1, talking about the Gentiles. You go to chapter 2, talks about the Jews. So the classification is that everyone has sinned when you get to chapter 3. Verse 20. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. And then he kind of summarizes it in verse 23 of chapter 3. We pretty much all have probably memorized this verse, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So this idea that man is totally depraved gives us the basis that it is presupposing that we are all one race. We have all descended from Adam, and we are all, by nature, sinners. Both Moses in Genesis and Paul in Romans tell us that the universality of sin is there. And also, because of sin, it renders humans blind to the gospel. Paul writing again, this time 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. Again, he writes to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. Therefore, seeing we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we faint not, but have renounced the hidden things of dishonesty, not walking in craftiness, nor handling the word of God deceitfully, but by manifestation of the truth, commending ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. But if our gospel be hid, it is to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. For we preach not ourselves, but Christ Jesus the Lord, and ourselves your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, hath shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. So we are all sinners. The Bible makes it clear, I think, that we're all are sinners. It renders us blind to the gospel. Paul says in both 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and 2 Corinthians chapter 4 that we are spiritually blind. Not only are we spiritually blind to the gospel, but we are enemies with God. Romans chapter 8, verse 7. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, and enemies against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. And not only are we enemies of God, we are dead in sin. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And you hath he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sin. Paul talking to the church at Ephesus, reminding them of where they've come from. Wherein in time past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, among whom also we had all our conversation in times past in the lust of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature the children of wrath, even as others. I mean, the Scripture is laying out this case, making humanity your sin. Everything's been touched by sin. Every human being has been touched by sin. We are all sinners. But not only that, we are deceived. We are blind to the gospel. We're enemies with God. Sin is deceitful and extremely wicked, Jeremiah 17:9. And as we looked at just a couple of weeks ago in Matthew chapter 15, it's all the source of all of our actions and thoughts. Remember this, Jesus dealing with the Pharisees in chapter 15, verses 16 through 20 of Matthew. And Jesus said, "Are ye also yet without understanding?" It's not that your hands are dirty, it's what cometh forth out of your body that's dirty. Those things which proceed out of the mouth cometh from the heart, and they defile the man. And so, we as humanity, we as people, are been totally encased in sin. We're born sinners. And if it not by the grace of God, we die sinners. And as we see, even in our society and culture, do we not? It seems like sin is running rampant. People want to blame someone else for someone's sin, when it's my responsibility if I sin, and it's your responsibility if you sin, and your responsibility if you sin. And it's just another thought process, another idea that's been proposed that if we can blame someone else's problem on someone else's sin, then I don't have to feel responsibility for that. problem is when it comes to sin, no matter what good we do or how well we act, or no matter what things we do, fallen people cannot rescue themselves. Romans 8, 6 through 8, this idea that people cannot, and in the sense, if you want to differentiate the spiritual from the physical, we know people that are unsaved that do good humanitarian things all the time, do we not? Right, we can agree to that. There's people that are unsaved, that are not believers, that do good things in life. They're good humanitarians. But that doesn't make, because of all the good they do, does that make them right before God? Romans 8, 6 through 8, Paul speaking. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. So then that they that are in the flesh cannot please God. You kind of get his flow of thought there in those three verses. The idea that man cannot do good because they cannot please God, because they are enemies against God, because they're not under the law of God. So the sin causes us to be deceitful and wicked. It's all of our source of evil thoughts and actions. It renders us blind to the gospel. And so when we're faced with this, we cannot do good unto God. We cannot receive revelation. Just Sunday night, right? Matthew 16 through 17. Did Peter, I'll ask this, hopefully you were paying attention. Did Peter learn of who Jesus is by watching others?
No.
No. Who told Peter who Jesus was? God did. The Father. Only I revealed it unto you, Simon Bar-Jonah. He said, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. What's the difference between Peter and the crowds?
He saw Christ.
He saw Christ. He witnessed Christ. But what is the difference between Peter and the crowds? What was the one thing that we just said is the difference between Peter and the crowds?
They didn't accept him.
They didn't accept him. God was the one who revealed Jesus to Peter. You can go back to Matthew chapter 11. And remember, before you get to that verse where we talked about, come unto me, all ye that labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Just the verse prior, verse 27. Or you could even jump back to verse 25, that little paragraph there, for 25 to 27. At that time Jesus answered, and I said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. Even so, Father, for it seemed good in thy sight. All things are delivered unto me of my Father, and no man knoweth the Son but the Father. Neither knoweth any man the Father save the Son, and he to whomever the Son will reveal him. We can put it this way. The only difference between Peter and the crowds is God's grace. Did Peter deserve to know who Jesus is? No. Was it Peter's own recognition of who Jesus is spiritually for Peter to know? No. The only reason that Peter knew who God was or who knew Jesus is because the Father revealed it to him. Think about this, John chapter 6. If you were to look at John chapter 6, this is right after when John records this for us after the feeding of the 5,000. We didn't get into this section so much after the feeding of the 5,000 and Matthew. But John takes a little bit of a hiatus from there, and he begins teaching. Jesus begins to teach more about this idea of the feeding of the 5,000. And you get to verse 44. Jesus says to those that are murmuring at him, the Jews, in verse 41, he says to them, Jesus therefore answered and said, verse 43, unto them, murmur not among yourselves. No man can come to me except the Father which hath sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day. Verse 45, it is written in the prophets, and they shall be taught of God. Every man therefore that hath heard and hath learned of the Father cometh unto me. So what's Jesus telling the crowds there in verses 44 and 45? They're murmuring about who this person is, and Jesus basically says, God, the only reason you know who I am is if God draws you. So back to Peter's revelation. Again, did Peter figure it out? No. Peter, only by God's grace, was revealed to that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus goes on in John chapter 6. You can look down to verses 64 and 65. But there are some of you that believe not. For Jesus knew from the beginning who they were that believed not and who should betray him. And again it says in verse 65, and he said, therefore said I unto you that no man can come unto me except it were given unto him of the Father, of my Father. Even amongst the 12, Jesus knew that there were 11 that the Father revealed who Jesus was, and the other was not revealed. Paul elaborates further on this in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. There are many people in this world that are wise, are they not? Intelligent. Much more intelligent than I am. But the difference between myself and that individual is not who's more smart, it's God's grace. I mean, we can't even rescue ourselves. We are dead. We looked at Ephesians chapter 2 already, and you hath he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins. The fallen people can do much moral good. They can do social good. They can do societal good. They can do culturally good. They can show love to family members. They can show kindness to other people. They can display civic pride and civic virtues. They can produce great works of art in the musical realm and in the art realm. They can make major contributions to the well-being of their fellow citizens. What is the one thing that they cannot do, though?
Save themselves or worse.
Save themselves, and they cannot glorify God. Chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. But if you are an unbeliever, you cannot glorify God. I like to use illustration. And if you probably look at the illustration, you can put holes in it. But if you planted a seedling, especially up here in February, to get it ready to put it in the ground in May, if you just stick it in a window, it's bent towards one direction, is it not? That plant is bent to go after the sun. It doesn't know any other way except something happens to the plant to move it or to put it out in the sun. The plant can't do anything of its own. And we're very much like that plant when it comes to sin. Before our salvation, we are predisposed to bend towards sin. We can't do anything of ourselves. We can't save ourselves. If we continue in that bent, we'll end up dying without God, except by God's grace in our life. And in reality, that's what every person in this world needs, especially in our society, is that they need to hear the gospel. Because the gospel is the only thing that's going to change someone's heart. It's the only thing that's going to change someone's life. It's the only thing that's going to change this country, is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining us this evening by way of Facebook. We'll open the floor up for discussion time.